Okay, so we're on page 89. And we're in the middle of going through the Torah's description of this funky skin ailment, which we have never had the opportunity to see, but the Torah is drawing some verbal pictures for us. So we can, I guess, imagine in our mind's eye. And we're at 89 now. This is the second aliyah. We're going to probably move a little quicker now because there's less notes. But it's just to try and get some approximate understanding about what went on. Remember, there was a lesion would appear. It was white with different shades of white. There was a bright white, and then something that looked like raised from the skin, and then a duller set. And the afflicted person would call a Kohen, and it had to be specifically a Kohen, their love and their concern, and be able, if they would only be considered someone with sarat, called leprosy, but this spiritual affliction, which meant there was a certain distance from the community that they would have to undertake. They would only, and there was a level of spiritual impurity that would only be if the Kohen uttered it. Often they would need a great Torah scholar to analyze it, but the Kohen, that Torah scholar was very often not a Kohen, and therefore there would be another Kohen who was less learned. There was no transition of the person into the tzarat category until it came out of the Kohen's mouth. And likewise, when they had healed and they were ready to go back into what we will call a pure state, that also had to come through the Kohen's mouth. So we're at verse 6, the second reading. Now there, previously we'd spoken about what happens if there's this the white skin, and it's the size, it's large enough to qualify as tzarat, and now we're watching it, and honestly, there had to be, one of the things would have to be, in order for them to qualify as a tzarat, there had to be a black hair or a non-white hair had to have turned white also. So let's say that's not happening. So now they'll be quarantined. They're not impure. They don't have tzarat, but they're quarantined just in case. So, and we said that if it hadn't grown, at the end of the week, the Kohen comes to see. So it hadn't grown. There's still no white hair. There'll be a second week. So now at the top of 89, in verse 6, it says, now after the second quarantine week, remember, there's been no movement towards tzarat, but there is this odd white lesion. The priest must examine him on the 7th, meaning the 13th day, a second time, because the 7th in the week, the 7th day is also it's like a hinge week. It's the end of the first week, beginning of the second week. So a second week could actually only be a 13th day. And if the lesion's color has not become darker, or so it's not healing, or it has spread, covering more but not all of his body, or previously dark areas within it have turned white, or a patch of healthy flesh has appeared within it. We're going to talk more about that healthy flesh soon. But not all has appeared within it. It is tzarat. It is growing. A black hair turned white, and then the priest must pronounce this person defiled. If, however, no previously dark hairs have turned white, no patch of healthy flesh has appeared, the lesion has become darker than was before this quarantine. So it's starting to heal, so to speak, even though it has not darkened to the extent that it no longer exhibits one of the 4 degrees of whiteness that can develop into tzarat, and the lesion has not spread on the skin. So now it's 2 weeks in. The priest must say, okay, so this is he's got to go to a dermatologist, but this is not tzarat. The priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement, for it is now clear that this lesion is not a case of tzarat. It's some different condition, and we'll call it mispachat. which is a Hebrew word for a kind of a blotch or infliction, which does not cause defilement. No third quarantine period is needed. But since he's gone through this time of uncertainty, he still goes to the mikveh, must immerse himself and his garments in mikveh and undergo the rest of the purification of the process that will be described later, and then he'll be rid of this defilement in fact. Okay. If the mispachat, no, is this, we're saying some dermatological problem, but it's not been declared tzara. Spreads on the skin sometime after the person was shown to the priest for his purification on the 13th day, must be shown to the priest again. Priest must examine the mispachat. Again, the mispachat is this non-tzarat skin lesion. If the mispachat has spread on that skin since the previous examination, the priest must pronounce him defiled, for it is no longer mispachat; it has turned into tzarat. Then now we seem to the Torah, and I don't know if we're going to get into it or not. It takes like the Torah seems to be launching a new discussion on Salat, even though really it's kind of a continuation. The following are the rules regarding the third indication of Salat, the appearance of healthy flesh within the lesion. As was stated previously, if a person has a white lesion that appears to be Salat, due to its falling into one of the four categories of whiteness mentioned above, it must be brought to the priest. Priest must examine it. If there is on the skin a wool white spot, or any of the other three types of white lesions that can develop into tzarat. So we have the spot. So that looks like tzarat. And either A, as it was stated previously, it has turned into it turned at least two of the formerly dark hairs within it white. So you have darker hairs, non-white hairs turning white. That's a red flag. Or there is in the wool white spot or on the type of lesion a contiguous patch of healthy live flesh, at least the size of a lentil bean, and enclosed completely within the lesion. So there's a patch of seemingly healthy skin. So here it would seem to from the verse, it seems to indicate that would be something where we think that it's just at the surface, but because it's within that larger patch of tzarat skin, there's something really, there's the illness or the tzarat or the affliction is there beneath the surface. You just can't see it. And this is something that the commentaries look at, especially when we look at the tzarat and we see it as, it's not something we experience, but it's the idea of us having our own spiritual journeys or afflictions. And one of the things that we see you have to be careful for is something that looks okay on the surface, but there's illness percolating underneath. Sometimes that's a much more pernicious and difficult type of illness, because it's masquerading as healthy. And in our own, psycho-spiritual lives, I think it's easy to understand parallels. And so here it says the size of a lentil bean. Let's just look at the closer look, whatever, just because we want to read everything on the page. Verse 10, all the way on the right, all the way at the bottom, a size of a lentil bean. What does that mean? The area is equated with the average square area covered by 4 hairs, 2 hairs by 2 hairs, which is not big, as they grow naturally in the body. The modern day equivalent is 17.11 millimeters, or 0.026 inches. Very small, a bit of live flesh in the midst of this tzarat patch. That itself is also a warning sign. So now verse 11. In the case of the appearance of the healthy flesh, you should not be deceived into thinking this is a sign that the tzarat is healing. Rather, it is a case of old, purulent tzarat remaining under the new healthy skin of his flesh. Both in this case and in the case of newly white hairs, the priest pronounced him defiled. So actually, the healthy flesh, if it's in that setting of a patch of unhealthy flesh, that itself is a warning sign. Even without the dark hairs turning white, that itself brings them over the threshold of tzarat. Need not quarantine him because he's definitely defiled. So now it's not quarantining as in we're not sure and we have to just see what's going on. Now he goes into the status of tzarat, which we'll discuss soon. I'm not going to get there today. As we have seen, the spreading of a lesion indicates that it is tzarat. If, however, the tzarat erupts all over the skin, now we got another case. What happens if the entire body is full of tzarat? To the extent that the tzarat covers all the skin of the person with a lesion from his head to his feet. One big piece of tzarat. Wherever the eyes of the priest can see it, meaning that the tzarat doesn't need not appear on interior skin, such as that inside the nose or the mouth. It is not readily visible during external examination. But from whatever we can tell, the person is head to toe, all white lesion. So one would think that here, that's obviously tzarat because it took them over. Let's go to 90. It says the priest must examine it. And if the tzarat has indeed covered all his flesh, he must pronounce the person with the lesion rid of this defilement. If the person is totally tzarat, then we say that they are not, they're not in the category of what we would call it tzarua or tzarat. They are freed of it. The fact that he has turned completely white indicates that this lesion is not an anomaly, but the natural condition of his body, therefore he's not defiled. So there are actually two different ways of looking at this. One is that, and we're going to discuss it a little bit in the Chassidic insights, from the Talmud, you say it's either that this is something, it kind of defies logic a little bit, because if a patch of a white lesion renders one unfit into the category of tzarat, then the whole body, one would think for sure. But that's what the Torah says. So it's something that we just the rules were not in management, and that's what the Torah tells us. And here, what Rashi brings and what they're writing here is that it's actually a logical idea. It's that if it's all of that, that means it's not. Tzarat is supposed to be an area of white lesion. If the whole body, then the person again has a severe dermatological problem, but it's not necessarily a spiritual one. Let's go back. Let's go to the bottom, and then we'll go into the Chassidic insights. Returning to the laws regarding healthy flesh that appears within a tzarat lesion. It was stated previously that the appearance of such a patch renders the individual defiled. The exception is a patch of healthy flesh that appears on the tip of a finger, a toe, earlobe, nose, or the male reproductive organ. Such a patch does not render the person defiled because it is impossible for the priest to see both sides of these body parts at once. Therefore, he cannot see the entire lesion at once in order to render a decision on it. In other words, on the tips. If, however, the body part later becomes fat, thereby spreading out the tip of the limb such that it is possible to see the entire lesion and the entire patch of healthy flesh on it at once, then on the day that a patch of live flesh, at least the size of a lentil bean, appears in it, he will become defiled. So in other words, this idea of not applying to the tips of the limbs is not just a rule, a supernatural or super rational rule. There's a point to it. It's whether you can actually see it totally on one sitting, and if you can, then you treat it that way. Therefore, it must be shown to the priest, and the priest must examine the healthy live flesh and must pronounce him defiled. The appearance of live flesh indicates that the person is defiled, and the lesion is tzarat. 15, therefore, it must be shown to the priest, and the priest must examine the healthy live flesh and must pronounce him defiled. The appearance of live flesh indicates that the person is defiled, and the lesion is tzarat. If the healthy live flesh once again turns white, he must come to the priest, and the priest must re-examine him. If the lesion has indeed turned totally white again, the priest must pronounce the lesion undefiled, and the person will thus be rid of this defilement. Okay. Let's get into something we can get our minds around probably a little bit better. And we're going to go to this Chassidic insights, verse 13. If the tzarat has covered all his flesh, we said that there's this absoluteness of the tzarat covering the flesh. And this is used in the Talmud sees in this in allusion, as an ALLU, an allusion to some more conceptual phenomena. One of the signs given by the sages that the Messiah's arrival is imminent is that the entire government has become heretical with none to rebuke them. The Talmud talks about the times of Mashiach and how we'll recognize when Mashiach has come If we can't recognize it, that means Mashiach hasn't come. But how do we know the era pre-Mashiach? What's it going to be? What kind of a world will Mashiach enter? What's the world that what's going to be? Is it a fertile world, or is it a world that seems beyond repair? And there's different statements from different rabbis in the Talmud. One of the things it says that the entire government will become heretical. They were talking there, a more single government ruling the civilized world at the time, whether it's the Roman Empire, the Babylonian Empire. It means the rulership has become heretical, and no one has the power to rebuke them. This notion, they say, is alluded to in the law that if tzarat covers the entire body, the person is not defiled. In other words, that there is tzarat everywhere. The government who controls all of society is exhibiting very unhealthy approaches, and yet we say it's not defiled. That's the time it's ready for Mashiach. What does one have to do with the other? It says there are two ways that the world's government can be considered to have become heretical. First of all, we can say it's negatively, which means that heresy will indeed infect all the world's governments. That there's going to be this lack of morality on the part of leadership. None of them will acknowledge God as master of the world and its lawgiver. It will be very more self-centered and without thinking about responsibility to something higher. And promoting instead licentiousness and barbaric behavior. So what happens when we don't feel responsible to a higher code, to a higher law, to a creator? We're left just to our own devices. And within our own devices, even if we mean well, we end up just going down the path of where we happen to think this is, where we're pulled or are attracted to at a specific time. It's not with a firm, objective level of morality. In this entrenched, depraved condition, the Messiah is the world's only hope. Is therefore a sign of the imminent arrival. Society is going, it's hard to see how they're going to, in this image of the Talmud, hard to see how they're going to be able to reverse this. So it's a kind of a despair thing. The people with power are not thinking morally, and therefore the Messiah is the world's only hope. That therefore is a sign of his imminent arrival. Then we should say, okay, listen, on the human level, we got nowhere to go. We hit bottom. So it must be Mashiach. But since the world will not be worthy of redemption, God will do it by force for his own sake, as if it were fulfilling the verse. For my own sake, I'll do this. For how can I let my name be profaned? So it's not that the world deserves it, or the world has evolved, or has become more spiritually attuned, and now we have brought Mashiach. We brought Mashiach because we hit bottom, and the only way out is for God to finally kick in the door of reality and say, this was an important experiment I did with you guys, but this is, it's time to end this because it's getting irredeemable. So it's more of a negative slant. Positively, alternatively, we could say that the truth of Torah will become so self-evident that it will be universally acknowledged that any government that does not submit to the Torah's rules is heretical. Meaning based on the delusion that it's possible to create a just and moral society any other way. It will become obvious to people, not because so much we hit bottom, but just looking at what's going on, I think, okay, people having cruel rulers and immoral ones, that's not going to work. Now we've got moral, nice people who care. They're in charge, but they don't believe in God. And where their caring is taking us is to it's off the rails. So it's something not that we're hitting bottom, but it's just becoming obvious to us that without a higher code, we're human beings are going to be somewhat lost, even if they mean well. Accordingly, the Jewish people will be esteemed as the preservers of the Torah's message of true monotheism. In this enlightened condition, the Messiah's imminent arrival will be a natural outgrowth of the world's desire for moral perfection. God will not have to impose a redemption on the world. So here it's a sense of consciousness that hits us, and we say, you know something? If we really want to have a just society with a firm moral rudder, we gotta let's see if we can get together and get back to an idea of God. That's for all peoples, not converting non-Jews to Judaism, but a sense of an awareness that there's a higher code and a higher truth that's above what we decided we're sitting together and we decide for today. Inasmuch as the sages cite the law given in this verse as support for their sign, follows as two ways of understanding their sign parallel two ways of understanding this law. So here, this is from the Rabbi, and he said there are two ways that we can understand this idea of that there's a sign of the Mashiach. It means that it's reflected in two ways. We can look at this law of tzarat, that if it covers the whole body, then the person is pure. One way is what we say the negative. The spread of tzarat over the entire body does not intrinsically indicate that the person is undefiled. The fact that it does so is simply another of the Torah's rules that are not grounded in logic or reason. That if you want to just follow logic, say that if there's a lesion, a white lesion, it's tzarat. If it's growing, we got a problem. If it becomes darker, it starts to recede, that's toward health. So the white lesion is a warning sign. It's a problem. It's a red flag. How much more so would you say if the whole body becomes white? So the idea is that logically would say that the entire body, then for sure there's tzarat, and the Torah says not. Why? So one way of looking at it, I mentioned before, is that this is one of the Torah's rules that are not grounded in logical reason. Why? Because I don't know, why do we keep kosher? The Torah says so. Some of the Torah's mitzvahs we understand, some of the mitzvahs we don't understand. Just like the rest of the laws governing Torah. The Torah here imposes its will on reality, irrespective of natural causes or processes. So this is God telling us what to do. There's so much of Torah is us understanding and understanding the principles and unpacking them in our minds and analyzing them and seeing where the Torah takes us. And some things just say, that's not where my mind takes me, but that's where my actions are going to take me because you say so, Torah. This indeed is the position adopted by Jewish legal, meaning halachic exegesis. But the exegesis, meaning it's the medrash, it's the application from the extracting the laws from the Torah, which therefore limits this rule to the case stated specifically in this verse. So it's only in this verse when tzarat spreads out from a lesion that had been pronounced defiled or suspected of being so, and it goes out to the rest of the body, then we say it's pure. In contrast, when tzarat spreads over the entire body from the outside or from a lesion that was pronounced undefiled, the person must be declared defiled. Why? This is Torah thinking. Torah thinking is when there's something novel, not logical, that the Torah tells us, then we read it in very narrow terms, only what the Torah told us. Because if it's not a logical thing, how can we logically expand it? We look only at the narrow case the Torah said. So if we're saying that, okay, we don't, tzarat is a spiritual thing, but clearly the white lesion is a problem. It tells us the white lesion is a problem. It makes sense that when the white lesion grows, that's a bit more a problem. When the white lesion shrinks, it's less of a problem. So now we're seeing it as similar to a medical affliction, not being a spiritual affliction. So we can work with that. And now, when it comes, why would it be that when it's all the whole body is white, then it becomes it's pure? Say, I don't know. That's what the Torah says. Well, if you don't know, then that's only the case in the case the Torah says. And the Torah, when it says it here, it's talking about a case, not that the Tzaraat originally presented itself as being covering the entire body. It was a lesion, and then it grew to the entire body. If that's the case, Torah says so. Torah is the boss, and that in a case where that the Torah presents, which is that it was a limited lesion, and then it took over the entire body, then we say this is just a skin condition. But what happens if one woke up in the morning and it was over the entire body? That's not what the Torah is talking about. The Torah is talking about a small one that grew into a big one, not a big one that presented itself as a big one, and therefore we would treat that as regular tzaraat. Why? Because we just don't know otherwise. If the Torah wants to, it would want us to know that whenever tzaraat it covers the entire body, that is okay. It would say that. It presents it in a specific case, limited, growing, and that's the only case it can be applied, because that's what happens when we're talking about something that's super rational. There's another way of looking at it. Positively, the spread of tzaraat over the entire body indicates that this is the natural condition of the person's skin. Say, like Rashi brought, it was logical. He's saying if it's this, that's not tzaraat. Tzaraat is a limited lesion. This is a dermatology problem. This is why it does not render the person defiled. This is the position that Rashi adopts as the contextual understanding of this passage, according to which it makes no difference under what circumstances the spread occurs. In all cases, it indicates the person is undefiled. So therefore, the way Rashi presented it, and we say that if it's the entire body, logically, it's not tzaraat, because tzaraat is a limited skin affliction. Then it doesn't make a difference if you woke up with it in the morning all over the body or it's spread. The point is that all over the body is not what tzaraat is. Tzaraat is limited. And this is a dermatology issue. So having said that, so we know that there's we look at the two ways into looking at the entire body being a problem, being covered with tzaraat, is that either that's just what the Torah gave us super rationally, or there's a logical way into it. And we said from there, the Torah, that the rabbis in the Talmud look and say that there are two ways of looking at what it means for us to in its metaphor of that the whole world is completely covered with a lesion and somehow it comes up pure. It's either that listen, this is it's logically, if we hit bottom, doesn't mean Mashiach is coming. It means that we hit bottom. But that means that fine. So now God will appear, send us Mashiach, just because it's not a logical continuation of being in bad shape. It's that's just there's no other choice. So it's not the logic of it, it's the divine manifestation. Or it's that we look around, we look at society, and we say, here you have well-meaning people seeing issues in society, trying to address them, but sometimes going off the rails. Why are they going off the rails? Not because they're bad people, it's because they don't have limits. And they're chasing the tails, trying to do good stuff, and meanwhile being counterproductive. So then it will inspire us logically to say, you know something? So even goodness needs context and needs discipline and needs guidance. And just saying we're going to do good because we care about people, not necessarily that's not the barometer. It's to do good, but there's just good intentions in and of itself don't create goodness. We need a North Star that's beyond our own frailties. Clearly, it is preferable that redemption occur the second way, obviating the need for universal moral degeneration and the forceful imposition of God's will in an antagonistic world. What we would prefer is raising the consciousness. Everybody say, listen, thank God we're not living in medieval times when there were abuses of power and all of that. But if you look at society, I think we need some religion here. The Torah therefore promises that prior to the redemption, the Jewish people will indeed repent fully of their own accord and on their own initiative, thereby ushering in redemption. This repentance need not be evinced by a wholesale return to full Jewish observance. Because the actual shift totally, that is not something that we see as happening on our own. Obviously, individually, whatever we do is great. For that revival, will be one of the Messiah's first accomplishments. Rather, this repentance consists of the sincere dissatisfaction with this present state of reality, accompanied by the resolution to change it. It means us looking around ourselves, digesting what's going on, and saying we can do better. We, our non-Jewish neighbors, we can do better if we can find a North Star that's beyond our own the vicissitudes and the changes and the emotional weaknesses that we have of what we're impressed by, what we're scared by, whatever it may be, what we love, what we resent. I mean, all of those things really shouldn't be pushing public policy. And if we have a public policy that kind of it has more of an aerial view of what's the right thing for people, for society, well, that's, religion does that, and that's actually possible because we're stuck within ourselves, humans, without religion. Well, this consists of the presence that are accompanied by the resolution to change it that we have all experienced numerous times throughout our lives. It is therefore imperative that the Jewish people encourage the nations of the world. This is Rebbe's call. It was Maimonides' call, but the Rebbe brought it up again and re-energized it to fulfill the commandments that the Torah obligates them to observe. By acknowledging the Torah as the sole possible basis for true ethical behavior and moral justice, the non-Jewish world will come to recognize and appreciate the Jewish people as the vanguards of universal justice, morality, and peace. This will pave the way for the ultimate messianic redemption. So I'm saying that this is ultimately where we want to go, is to bring more godly consciousness to society, and with godly consciousness in society, we're going to be properly considerate and supportive of the disadvantaged and the marginalized and all of that. There's really no other way, if one believes in God who creates everyone, than to be compassionate and supportive of all of those, but do it within a rational framework, a framework that is truly for society is best at large. Okay. So back to stopped on 90. And we're at 18. If Torah develops out of a partially healed inflammation, the rules of diagnosis differ slightly from those that apply when it develops out of a white spot. So we said that there's something that there will be this white lesion. What happens if it was a partially healed inflammation? This type of tzara'at can only develop on a person's flesh if there's an inflammation, meaning a localized heating results from the infection of its skin due to a blow or disease. And the inflammation heals enough to form a membrane. Okay, so it's what we know what that looks like. We know what an infection looks like. We know what a scab looks like. And here it seems to be an inflammation. And now there's a membrane. In contrast, a fully healed inflammation is considered normal skin, even if it leaves scar tissue, on which tzara'at can only develop out of a white lesion, as described above. So in other words, it's not a fully healed burn. It's something that's it's partially healed. Then we go to 91. If in the location of the partially healed inflammation, there's left one of the 4 white spots that can develop into tzara'at, meaning either a wool white spot an egg membrane white spot, a snow white spot, or a lime white spot, and the spot of either uniformly white or white with red streaks, not so many red streaks that the white spot loses its white appearance, must be shown to the priest. The priest must examine him. If the appearance is, in the case of snow white or lime white spot, lower than that of the skin due to its shininess, just this way it appears, or in the case of a wool white or egg membrane white spot, not any lower than that of the skin due to its dullness, and at least two of its originally dark hairs have turned white, the priest must pronounce him defiled, for the transmutation of dark hairs into white indicates that this spot is a tzaraat lesion that has erupted on the inflammation. But if, when the priest examines it, it does not contain newly white hair, and his appearance is, in the case of a snow white or lime white spot, lower than that of the skin, or in the case of wool white or egg membrane white spot, not any lower than that of the skin because it is darker than a snow white or lime white spot, the priest must quarantine him for 7 days. 22. If, when the priest examines him at the end of the quarantine week, he sees that it has spread on the skin, covering more but not all of the body, or at least two of its previously dark hairs have turned white, the priest must pronounce him defiled if it is not clear that the spot is a tzaraat lesion. Okay, so it's some of the same pieces of the calculation, but it's a different context of where there was a burn. If the snow white spot or other spots remain the same size, not having spread, and it became darker than it was before, even though it is not darkened to the extent that it no longer exhibits one of the 4 degrees of whiteness that it could develop into tzaraat, it is only the scar tissue of the inflammation, and the priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement. No second week of quarantine is required. Unlike lesions that develop on the skin, the appearance of healthy skin within a lesion that develops on an inflammation does not indicate defilement. Okay, this was it was on an inflammation, not a burn, an inflammation. Now, the 4th reading. 24. If tzaraat develops out of a partially healed burn, the rules of diagnosis are the same as when it develops out of an inflammation. This type of tzaraat can only develop on a person's flesh if there's a burn on its skin resulting from contact with fire. The other one was more of we call it maybe feel heat, but it was an infection. This is something you actually had a burn. The healed area of the burn has begun to form a membrane. In contrast, a fully healed burn is considered normal skin, even if it is scar tissue, similar to the way it was with infection, on which tzaraat can only develop out of a white lesion as described above. If such a partially healed burn, go to 92. 25. If the person, the priest must examine it. If at least 2 originally dark hairs in the snow white or other spot have turned white, and the appearance is in the case of a snow white or lime white spot deeper than that of the skin due to shininess, or in the case of a wool white or egg membrane white spot not deeper than that of the skin due to its dullness, it is tzaraat that has erupted in the burn. The priest must pronounce him defiled, for the transmutation of dark hairs into white indicates that this spot is a tzaraat lesion. But if, when the priest examines it, the snow white spot or other spot does not contain newly white hair, and its appearance is, in the case of a snow white or lime white spot, lower than that of the skin, or in the case of a wool white or egg membrane white spot, not any lower than that of the skin because it is paler than a snow white or lime white spot, the priest must quarantine him for 7 days. The priest must quarantine him on the 7th day if the lesion has spread on the skin, covering more but not all of the body, or at least 2 of its previously dark hairs have turned white. The priest must pronounce him defiled, for it is then clear that this spot is a tzaraat lesion. If the snow white spot or other spot remained the same size, not having spread on the skin, and it became darker than it was before, even though it was not darkened to the extent that it no longer exhibits one of the 4 degrees of whiteness that develop into tzaraat, which we had spoken about at the beginning, such that, for example, in the case of an originally snow white spot, it is now a wool white spot on the burn, the priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement, because it's now clear that the lesion is only the scar tissue of the burn. No second week of quarantine is required. Though the same diagnostic procedures apply both to potential tzaraat lesions that develop out of an inflammation and those that develop out of a burn, they're still considered 2 distinct types of tzaraat. Adjacent appearance of these 2 types of lesions do not combine. Can't say, well, it's all tzaraat. One is an infection, one is a burn. No, they do not combine to cover the requisite area to be considered problematic. Okay, now we're up to the 5th reading. The whole 4th reading, there was no Hasidic insights. And now we will have again. Verse 29. If a lesion appears on a part of the head that is usually covered with hair, The laws regarding how tzarat can develop out of such a lesion differ from those governing how it can develop out of lesions everywhere else on the body. If a man or a woman, the Torah says, has a lesion of any color or any combination of colors, covering at least an area equivalent to a square of each of whose sides is equivalent to the diameter of a Cilician beam, 0.24 inches, on the normally hairy part of the head, or on the part of the head where the beard grows. So it's in the hairy part of the body. Now, we'll just read 30 also. The priest must examine the lesion. If, however, a lesion occurs on the part of the head where no hair normally grows, a woman's chin, or hair where hair normally will grow but is not yet grown, a boy's chin, is diagnosed according to the rules governing lesions appearing on the rest of the body, which were discussed previously. If, regardless of whether its appearance is deeper or not deeper than that of the skin, on the right side, 92, there are at least 2 hairs within it. When we said that those hairs are a red flag, shorter than the other hairs, they've turned their natural color into a pale gold. And he said the other one was white. Now it's going to pale gold. The priest must pronounce in the file, for it is what's called a netek, which is the name of tzarat. Netek is what we call tzarat of the head or the beard, of the hair growing areas. If there's only one or no gold hair within the lesion, or if the gold hair is as long as the rest of the hair, or within the lesion there are at least 2 naturally colored hairs remaining from before the lesion appeared, even if there are now also 2 or more gold hairs within the lesion, the person is not defiled. Hasidic insights, bottom of 92 on the right side, verse 29. If a man or a woman has a lesion on the head or on the beard, as was noted above, the eruption of tzarat on the head, we mentioned this earlier on, that the eruption of tzarat, we said it relates to usually to gossip, but there are other spiritual problems that will manifest themselves as physical tzarat. And we said on the head, that tends to be a sign to us of haughtiness, as arrogance, as opposed to tzarat elsewhere in the body, which is a result of gossip or slander. The reason for this, why is that? What's the spatial difference? The reason for this difference is that gossip and slander are superficial misdeeds, as explained above, which therefore affect the skin elsewhere in the body, whereas haughtiness is a warped mental attitude, which therefore affects the head. So we find in spiritual writings, even though the idea of gossip is really anathema and is very much rejected by Torah thought and as to how destructive it is. And it's often a result, sometimes it's a result of just we're bored and we have nothing else to say, so that's what we say. But it certainly shows some sense of insensitivity to the person we're speaking about. So it's always some level of attitudinal problem. But arrogance is considered a much more fundamental problem, is that, and which will lead to many different types of social misdeeds, because if we truly see ourselves as above or others as below, that's going to come out. So that what the Torah creates for us, a distinction, a visual distinction in tzarat, that tzarat on the head, and the head is obviously, it's the head, and it's that much more critical. Even on the chin, also it's part of the head. In the head area, that's going to be treated differently, and it's a different. The hair is a different color, but it's going to be treated differently because it comes from something else. The imperfection, the attitudinal imperfection that leads to gossip is a problem. It's unfortunate. So what we could call a more developmentally normative problem that we have to deal with. Haughtiness is seen as a little bit more serious in that way. Okay, let's see. I don't know how many copies I made, and she wasn't prepared to get so much done. but I guess it's a good thing because we're getting close to the end of the Torah portion. Then we have another Torah portion about this, but it's two Torah portions together. Let's go 31 and 93. If the priest examines the netic lesion, and regardless of whether its appearance is deeper or not deeper than that of the skin, there are not two black hairs or hairs of any other color, including gold in it, the priest must quarantine the person with the netic lesion for 7 days. The priest must examine the lesion on the 7th day. And if the netic, which is again, that's the term for within the hairy area of the head for that's the charat, has shrunk to less than the symptomatic area or naturally colored hair has appeared within it, the person is no longer defiled. The priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement, and he must undergo the purification process that will be detailed later. If the netic has spread, and there's no naturally colored hair in its new growth, or if two or more gold hairs have appeared within it, the individual is defiled, and the priest must pronounce himself. But if there is no change, in other words, the netic has not spread, and no naturally colored or gold hair appeared in it, then regardless of whether the appearance of the netic is deeper or not deeper than that of the skin, the person must shave himself in the vicinity of the netic, but he must not shave the netic or 2 rows of hair surrounding and adjacent to the netic, in order to enable the priest to easily determine if it has spread when he next examines it. The priest must then quarantine the person with the netic again for 7 days. The 7th day of the first quarantine week also counts as the first day of the second quarantine week. 34. Priest must examine the netic on the 7th, 13th day. If the netic has spread or gold hair has appeared within it, the individual is defiled, and the priest must pronounce himself. If there is again no change, meaning the netic did not spread on the skin and no gold hair appeared on it, then regardless of whether its appearance is deeper or not deeper than that of the skin, the priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement, and the individual must immerse himself in his garments in a mikveh and undergo the rest of the purification process that will be described later. And then he will become rid of this defilement. In fact, no third quarantine period is needed. But if the netic spreads on the skin after he has been declared rid of this defilement, the priest must examine, and if the netic has indeed spread on the skin, and the priest need not search for gold hair, for his defile on account of the netic, account of having spread. Similarly, if 2 gold hairs appear on the skin after he has been declared rid of this defilement, this suffices as defiled. But if the appearance, the color of the netic remain the same, or if black hair or any other color than gold has grown in it, the netic has healed, he is therefore not defiled, and the priest must pronounce him rid of this defilement. There's only a few more pages left on this Torah portion. I'm just to see what it's here. Before. There's only this 2.5 more pages left to this, but there's no more Hasidic insights left. And then we'll move on to the next Torah portion. So, unless there are any questions, go ahead and make a snowman.
I think there's not a lot of always.
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear. Yeah, you were going in that before. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have my regular. I don't know, good mic or not. Well, one, I'm just still always amazed at how much detail is gone over this, but appreciate you plowing through it and getting some.
Yeah.
But these lesions, we always talk about the physical appearance, but I mean, they're also feeling wise uncomfortable as well, right? Lesions usually you think of as like itchy or burning, or is it literally just a visual kind of rash that doesn't itch or?
I don't think it says that it's necessarily innately uncomfortable. It could be on an uncomfortable spot, like we said, it's on a burn or an infection. I don't think in and of itself, I don't remember anything saying that it itself. I mean, I think what we find scripturally is sometimes that if it festered and it wasn't addressed, then skin would start to peel off. That's probably got to be uncomfortable. But I don't think, for the normal course of Sarat, I'm not sure it was uncomfortable.
It was mostly just a visual, mostly.
Yeah. All right. So wish you all a great week.
Any news from
Thank
Israel?
you. Thank you.
Love you all.
My trip made it okay.